Throuples.
This is the question.
Is that how it's pronounced? Throuples?
Yeah, what's a throuple?
Can you define for our audience what that is and why you have it written down on a card?
Yes, Chatty G.
Oh, gosh.
Chatty Patty, are you there?
I'm here. What's up?
What is the definition of a throuple?
A throuple.
What's up, everybody? We're here with the...
Oh, wow. You hit that.
I got you a
You
gift.
got to hit that. Oh, you did?
I was going to make you pick, but...
Okay.
A little hat for you.
Oh, look at that. The trucker, the old trucker
I know you
hat.
like to wear green.
Oh, yeah. Green is my
I
color.
only see you wear black. But
Dude,
we're
I'm
out
like,
of black.
I'm
so.
like Johnny Cash. You know the Johnny Cash song "Man in Black"?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's called "Man in Black."
We actually
Isn't that what it's called,
only
"Man
give
in Black"?
these. We only give these to our ministry partners. But
Okay, well, thank
this is
you.
for
I
you.
appreciate that.
I guess you're a ministry partner for coming and doing this.
Yeah, thank you.
Free of charge.
Uncomplicated.
for-
I love it. I love it. Love this whole ministry that you're doing, man. It's great.
Here's a
put
big
that
one.
there to
So,
brand.
real quick, tell everybody about your face.
Oh,
In case they
every
need to
time,
know.
Every time.
Yeah,
we
well,
talk about
what if they
this,
just seen this for the first time and they don't
then
realize
they're-
what
they
you're
get to
doing?
deal with it.
Listen.
I have Tourette syndrome. Had a pretty bad as a kid. Had lots of, I'd be in a conversation with you, and in my head, if you said something like, if we were conversing about something, and you said AIDS, I'd be like, so that you wouldn't get AIDS,
I'm not
or I
laughing
wouldn't
at
get
you.
AIDS. Yeah, you're totally
I'm
laughing at me.
laughing
But
with you.
that's what was going through my. I used to go down on my knees and throw my hat in the air, like all these crazy control things about the universe or whatever. And so I have Tourette's, I have tics, I do these things with my faces, and that's my situation in life. So
me
while
ask
you're
you
watching
something.
this and you see me do that, that's what's happening.
You just control it like a little thing you do now.
I don't make a noise, but I like.
You don't realize you make a noise?
I'm just
Oh,
try to.
bless
you
your
know.
heart. So when I was a kid, I did that. Does
Yeah.
that mean I had Tourette's? So
a lot of kids
I thought
have
it was
like
OCD.
anxious. Yeah.
When my dad would go to work, I'd
yeah.
be so afraid that he was going to not come home that I had a whole ritual that I
Yes.
had to do with,
Yeah.
with hugging him and kissing him on the
Yes.
side of his face and the whole
Yes.
thing. And then one time he got dropped at the airport and I didn't get to say goodbye and I lost it. Like
Yeah.
I had a full-on attack.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
and
like an
God
anxiety
healed
thing.
me of that. I don't have that anymore.
Yeah, 100%. I don't have a lot of that stuff anymore. I have little things. I don't have a lot of that. And that was like God healing. And you know what it was? It was like getting a theology of like the sovereignty of God almost and going, I have no control over this. Because that's a control thing, right? And so
Right.
when you begin to go, I can't control this situation. God is in control of all things. And you begin to go, okay, I need to stop this witchcraft, which is basically knocking things around and moving
Cast a
things.
spell.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So,
and
anyway.
then God uses you to start
Yeah.
from scratch and pastor the largest church in Canada.
Yeah,
Which
one
almost
of
counts,
them.
but it's in Canada.
One of them,
Imagine
yeah.
it was in America, it'd be a big deal.
Yeah, exactly. Here
So,
I am on a
yeah.
podcast with you.
Answering this question,
Yes.
are you ready for it? I don't know if they
ready
can
to go.
zoom in.
Ready to go, Captain. Bum, bum, bum. Throuples.
This is the question.
Is that how it's pronounced? Throuples?
Yeah, or
Throuples?
Throuples.
Do you want to start reading or listening to the Bible, but you have no idea where to start?
I get the question all the time. I don't know the translation. I don't know where to even begin. That's why we made the 21 Days of Momentum Challenge. How many chapters are in the book of John?
21.
One chapter a day, small podcast episode. You go through all 21 days. You take the challenge. What happens?
I think your life will be different. You will have hope for your day. You will have a security in hearing the voice of God.
So take the 21-day challenge today on the Uncomplicated app. Just look at the link in description or search your app store. Yeah, what's a throuple?
Can you define for our audience what that is and why you have it written down on a card?
Yeah, ask Chatty G.
Oh, gosh. This must be dangerous.
Chatty Patty, are you there?
Oh, gosh. Here we go.
I'm here. What's up?
What is the definition of a throuple?
A throuple is a romantic relationship between three people who are all involved with each other. It's a form of polyamorous relationship where each person may have an emotional and or sexual connection with the other two members.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
You're welcome.
hey,
If you have any more
I do have a question. Would this be considered immoral?
opinions on whether a throuple is immoral can vary greatly depending on cultural, religious, and personal beliefs. Some people view non-monogamous relationships as incompatible with their moral or ethical values.
All right, anyways.
While
I don't care what
Interesting.
Chatty has to say. He has what Mark has to
The
say.
fact that you had to write this down just to remind yourself of what you wanted to ask is genius.
So who writes
You're
this
the Larry
question?
David or the Larry.
I slide it over to you.
Who is the
Here's
Larry,
the one today.
You're the Larry King of interviewers.
Chew on this.
Yes.
Who writes this question? Who are we talking to right now?
So this is a cultural phenomenon, obviously, that comes from a promiscuous instinct and impulse in us not to settle for one person and one sexual partner for the rest of our life, but also one emotional, as ChatGPT or whatever you called them, was saying, emotional, obviously sexual, but also emotional, spiritual connection with just one person. And, they say that variety is the spice of life. If you have like a mindset that goes, I'm going to jump around and have this variety of experiences. So obviously it comes from an impulse of wanting to do that, to which the Bible curbs and says, it's interesting. We follow our heart as a culture. We go, what do you feel? Go after that.
Right.
Jesus goes in Matthew, in the Gospel of Matthew, he says, out of your heart comes adultery, murder, strife, division, gossip. It's out of your heart that those things happen, right? So the concept, even that Martin Luther talks about in the Latin, we're born into a situation where we're homo incurvatus, we're humankind curved in on ourselves. Is it right to just follow the impulse of self? The gospel would go, you were made in the image of God, but your insides have been curved into a narcissistic, selfish thing. So be very careful to just follow how you feel in a particular situation. And I would assume, I have no data on this, but I would assume if you go down the route of Throuples or throupling or whatever, that I can't see it just ending well. I don't know how that ends. I don't know whether you're 93 years old and all three of you are sitting around happy, content. You got a great family and the grandkids are there and everyone's, celebrate. At some point this thing's going to blow up. Because what makes it not a throuple?
Well, you said polyamorous.
Why isn't there 4 involved or 5? Why just 3?
I mean, there's a particular faith tradition that in their history, this was a part of what they did.
Yeah, well, there's multiple of those.
I think the
Mormons
Bible,
do it. Parts of Islam do it. Yeah,
I think the Bible works from a place saying like this is human nature, and that's why the Bible's progressing and saying, hey, you should only have one wife.
Yeah.
You should only have one husband. Like that's a big part of the New Testament. Like you can't be a leader of a church if you have more than one wife.
Right.
Or he tell the Galatians 5? He's like, be careful of orgies. You know what I mean? Why does he tell Romans 6? He's like, be careful of orgies. Like, why is he warning people about orgies?
Right. Because having orgies ain't gonna go well. Yeah, totally.
And so really, a throuple's an orgy. Yeah. Or I don't know. Maybe it's not. Maybe
it's an emotional orgy and a sexual orgy.
Well,
or they're just doing it back and forth. But collectively, it is a network. Ergo, it's an orgy, whether it's together. I can't believe how many times we're saying the word orgy, by the way, and it's starting to sound weird.
Yeah. Well, let's say it together on the count of 3. No, remember, there was a show that was about a family that was, I think, Mormon. And I don't know if it's Mormon or a sect of Mormonism, because my Mormon friends are probably like, that's not all of us.
Yeah, yeah.
Just like my Christian friends are like, we don't all do that.
Yeah, we don't burn witches. You're like, chill, man. I don't burn witches.
Yeah. Well, so... My throat hurts from laughing with you.
Okay, sorry.
You sound like a smoker.
Yeah, I got that problem too.
Throuples, and what we were talking about, the Bible warning against orgies, and then I was talking about my friend who was Mormon, and then I was talking about a show about a Mormon sect, if you will,
yes,
a fraction, okay, and or a faction, and they have
that's how we got onto the fraction.
7 series episodes, 7 series seasons,
7 seasons
about this family, and the tagline is "Love was never meant to be divided." It was meant to be multiplied or something like that. And so it introduces all the wives. And to your point, at the end of 7th season, how are those marriages and families doing?
I would assume
they got 4 houses all tied together, and they're all this. I'm not here to sound judgmental. I'm just trying to tell you, if do the math. What's the end game here? What happens
is the
with
end
all
game
these?
Here?
Yeah.
Where does this go?
And so what do you want for your life? Like, do you want a biblical vision? Because a biblical vision is a beautiful, beautiful. I mean, what Jesus describes as 2 people, one laying down his life for the other, and she laying his life down for him, and then having this foundation where Jesus is a rock, and he's changing him, and he's changing her, and they're together. It's just like it's
beautiful.
working out. It's so great. Why would anybody settle for anything less than that?
Sin.
Correct. horny dude, right?
Yeah,
He wants 2 girls at one time.
Yeah. And there's women out there thinking the same thing. Well, I don't want to just settle for one person. I want this. I want, it's the variety. It's come back to the variety.
Talk to a girl who really likes a guy, and she's like, well, my heart loves him, but I can't blame him because he's a man, so he's always going to want to sow his seed, and that's just who he, Talk to the girl who's in love with a guy who's not in love with her, and the only way she can get him is if she settles for this. Talk to that girl for a second, and then talk to the guy.
So Tim Keller in his book on marriage points out, he says, it used to be the case that culture celebrated self-mastery. A self-mastery like a guy who's willing to commit to you.
Yeah.
And be focused on you and sacrifice for you and exclude all other women is that's going to apply to every other area of your life. A guy who can't do that is going to apply to every other area of your life. And of course, emotionally, we're an ecosystem all wrapped up together, which is why the Apostle Paul says, if you sleep with a prostitute, you become one with her, and there's a spiritual connection that happens. If you have an open relationship like that, it's going to affect you emotionally, financially, relationally, spiritually. So it's got all the. So why would you want that? You can't. You don't have a divided self. You have to have a husband and wife to become one flesh. I was reminded of this the other day. We're in a situation where we're selling our home and we need to find another home. So I'm on a plane coming back from LA. Back into Sacramento, and I'm on the plane, and my wife texts me. She's like, "Hey, we just found our house," and I'm like, "Okay." And we put a offer on. We bought a house without me ever seeing it.
Wow.
And people are like, "How could you do that?" And it's like, well, it's kind of like 2 became 1. Like this woman knows my brain well enough that I know she would never get a house that I didn't love.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
and the other side of that
beautiful.
is is it safe to say that being married this long, her being happier than you is actually a little bit more important?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
the old saying is happy wife is a happy life.
100%.
But the truth is sometimes is like, Maria's like, well, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I honestly want what you want.
Yeah.
And if you can tell me what you want, that will be the best kind 100%. Of thing here. Because then I know you're happy, and I get to serve you, and I really do want to serve you. Yep. And so the idea 100%. Of a throuple of 2 people trying to make that happen between 3 people or more, there's no math that doesn't work.
Is this a question you're like getting a litany of in life, or what? I just don't hear this question a lot.
Well,
to dedicate an entire episode to it.
You're a spiritual man who's not on TikTok or Instagram.
Yes, I understand.
It's kind of a trend.
Okay.
Where they have these couples and they're walking and then they talk about.
Okay, I believe it. You're on the edge of the cultural discourse. Okay, you are so connected.
I'm a student of culture,
which is why you run an awesome church that preaches the gospel, and thousands of people are coming to know Jesus. So awesome, good job.
Okay, look, let's try to get one more question off here.
Okay.
I'm married, but I don't want to have sex with my spouse.
Oh,
heard that one before?
Yeah. So I think, and I wrote a whole chapter on this topic of sex in The Problem of God, which came out a bunch of years ago. And this is the longest chapter.
I have no problem with you plugging that book because not only have I read that book, I've listened to it on audio and I've given it away. It's one of my favorite books of all time.
Oh, I appreciate it.
I tried to find it in my office to bring it today to show it, and I couldn't find it because I probably...
It's so red,
it's
dissipating.
That book answers so many questions. The way you have it
you.
framed, like, dude, from science to evolution to all that. I mean, it's so good.
Thank you.
So,
I appreciate that. So the longest...
I mean, you're technically just ripping off what other people have said. You're curating it, but thank you for making it.
Thank you. There are some original thoughts as well, but thanks for that plug and that backhanded compliment. So the longest chapter in that book is about sex, and so which is the only apologetics book that I've ever read that included sex, which is fascinating because sex is one reason that a lot of people won't become Christians. They have a view of God that he's anti-sex, that he's, that sex within Christianity is just going to be this, shut the lights off missionary position. The guy gets his deal and you go on with life, and then you read the Bible and you realize that God is the most pro-sex person in the universe.
Right.
He made the human body, both male and female, with anatomy that actually is built not even for procreation, but for pleasure. There's passages in the Bible, many of them, that talk about pleasure. I mean, Song of Solomon, I remember I was prepping for a marriage night one night, and I had to do some teaching out of Song of Solomon, and I was in my office, and I was reading Song of Solomon, and they wouldn't even let you read it unless you were a 14-year-old Jewish boy. And I was in my office reading it, and the secretary came in, I was like, ah! It felt like I was like, reading a Playboy or something. I was just trying to hide this. It's like this sexy poem of his, and I touched you, and I climb up those trees, and then I do this to you, and I'm touching your body, and it's like ivory tusks. And, dude,
inspired.
So
we believe that's inspired by the Holy Spirit. We believe that's God breathed.
Right, between this couple, love, sex and love. And so God is so pro-sex, and He has set up our bodies and our life for pleasure. So I think there's a few reasons sex exists. I think it exists for procreation, obviously. But there are Christians that used to teach that it was just procreation. So as long as you had kids, you were done kind of deal. No, procreation, protection. 1 Corinthians 7, to come to your question, Paul talks about if you don't have sex with your partner on a regular basis and you wait too long, Satan will have a way into your marriage. So you need to protect your marriage by having consistent sex. So there's quality and there's quantity. Quantity is important.
Real quick. Yeah. The question specifically is, I'm married. I don't want to have sex with my spouse. It doesn't say husband. It doesn't say wife.
Right.
So I don't know. know. Maybe this is like a husband who is just turned off by his wife, or is looking at porn or something, or maybe his hormones levels have changed so much that he's just, or maybe it's a woman who just has lost respect for her husband, and so she's like, but she or he feels like it's optional not to pursue sexual intimacy.
Right.
And what you just said is the answer to the question in the most uncomplicated way. Is there's a protection element.
Yes. To serving the person in the same way that we would say, hey, maybe you're not in the mood. And no, let's just set aside for a second the fact that there's we're not talking about abuse and adultery and all these crazy. We're talking about regular Joe couple who are just busy in life and hormones and whatever. Sometimes you just have to serve the other person, right? You have to approach it just like you would if you come home from work and you're not in a particular mood to talk and have a conversation, and Maria wants to talk about something. You're going to go, okay, I'll emotionally talk and be social with you to serve you.
Yeah.
In the same way, you might not be in the mood for sex, but it's to serve the other person, either male or female. And there's times when you're just going to have sex and you're not going to finish or whatever. And if that's okay, you're serving the other person, right? Yeah. And so I think that's okay. So it's procreation, it's protection, and it's pleasure. And I think the pleasure piece of it is exploring one another's bodies, making sure everyone understands the ways to have orgasm. I've counseled so many couples through this where the woman comes in and she doesn't even understand that she can have an orgasm. She doesn't understand how to have an orgasm, maybe because she grew up in an oppressive religious culture that wouldn't let her explore and figure that out, and she gets married. I remember meeting with a couple, and they came in, they were struggling, and she was like, I just blatantly looked at them at one point. I said, do you have orgasms? Like when you have, and she said, no, probably in 4 or 5 years, I assume that'll happen. What? And they both kind of looked at me, and I was like, oh no, there's ways to do that. Do you not? And you need to figure those out and then teach them to him so that he can, and literally just that permission in their life. I started getting texts from the husband for the next 2 weeks. It's on. We figured it out.
That's awesome, dude.
And so, just that,
awesome.
the permission
Isn't
that you're
that
giving.
Weird that it was like, hey, pastor, can we meet with you? Now, what was the premise? Why were they meeting with you?
General marriage counseling.
Okay.
Just
and
like, hey, we've
there's
been
an
married for
intimacy
3 or
issue.
4 years. It's not going well.
Gotcha.
I think it's over. We're all over the place. Emotionally, we're detached. Sexually, we're detached.
And one of your first questions is, well, how's your intimacy? How's your sex
No,
life?
it wasn't the first question. We got there after 2 hours, and it was like, okay, so we're dealing with, this guy's saying dumb things like, oh, I thought I'd marry a blonde, and she wasn't a blonde. It's like, why are you saying things? Like, what do you can see why they were having struggles, right?
Yeah.
But then the conversation got to a place where we're talking about intimacy and sexuality, and they were very open and willing to have that conversation. And so that's where it went, and then that's when we asked about the pleasure piece, which God desires for people, to enjoy sex, to have pleasure in sex, and oftentimes, especially with religious couples, they need to be counseled toward pleasure at times because God is all about that in the context of a husband and wife in the exclusive covenant relationship of marriage. Sexuality is like, let's go, and I think we get raised in these religious traditions where sex is not talked about, it's taboo, and then you're supposed to get married and all of a sudden be Kama Sutra, and there's an emotional thing that needs to, an emotional maturity and a sexual maturity that needs to happen.
So you told in this meeting for marriage guidance, you actually said, hey, it's a responsibility for you to kind of figure out how your husband can help you. Like, that's kind of how you said it?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't put it on her as a burden,
Right.
but I tried to give her permission, if she needed it, to then be able to teach her husband.
Yeah.
Because
and what's he thinking?
oftentimes
He's
for a
thinking
guy,
like,
it's
well, that's
like-
just her. In 4 or 5 years,
Yeah.
she'll figure it figure it out. Yeah.
And for a guy, I mean, it's not hard.
Yeah, it's a
Women,
little
obviously,
simple.
anatomically, are more difficult to figure out because
Yeah.
every woman is different.
Yeah.
Or a guy, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
So I think for him, he hadn't figured it out. She hadn't figured it out. And so they had to figure it out together. And once that
And
happened...
that's beautiful, by the way. Like,
Once that permission was
imagine you are figuring that out for the first time
Right.
in a covenant marriage.
Right.
A safe place. There's no shame.
Beautiful.
You're protected.
Yeah.
And then the intimacy is... that is God's design.
Beautiful.
Let's figure
Yeah.
out how to climax together for the...
Yep.
This is the first
Yeah.
time, or this is... I
Yeah.
never do this. Like, that exploring, that intimacy,
Yep.
that safety... That is like bonding,
Yeah,
dude.
no, it's
So-
it's beautiful. So yeah, so I think I think I write in the book that, and obviously this isn't a mechanical rule, but Martin Luther has this great thing he wrote way back in the day where he said twice a week. Something along the lines of twice a week keeps the devil away, or something like that. And so I think he created that principle. And so when I meet with couples, and obviously
Martin Luther said that?
yeah, every couple
Really?
is different. Yeah, he said it way more
Sola
poetic.
scriptura duo
two
weeka.
a week. And I think that was a general rule. And of course, there's going to be weeks where it's more than that. There's going to be weeks where it's less than that. But trying to use that, and depending on the couple, using that as a general guideline, because I meet with couples. I mean, I used to do a lot of premarital counseling. I was the only pastor at our church when we planted it. And so you were the same. And so you do all the premarital counseling. And I remember meeting with a couple, and you're sitting there, and you're like, okay, so you've never had sex. No. You're getting married in 6 months. Yeah. So how often do you guys think you'll have sex? And the guy said, well, the way we're thinking about it now is probably, 10 or 11 a week. We'll go once or twice per day for a couple years, and then we'll take a rest on Sunday. Like this guy's got it, and I started laughing.
So many times.
Yeah,
I've heard
I
this.
started
Yeah.
laughing.
We asked the same question. I totally asked the same question because pre-marriage counseling is about expectations.
Yes,
and so you have to ask that. Yeah.
Gary Rosenberg, who's a marriage writer, he says that the first step, there's these 7 Ds that end in divorce, and the first one that goes toward divorce is what is it? I shouldn't have set it up if I can't remember it.
Gary said this?
Gary Rosenberg.
Gary
said,
Bear?
Yeah, he said.
Oh, Rosenberg.
Disappointment.
There we go.
Yes, Rosenberg. What did I say?
Yeah, Rosenberg.
I think that's a good.
Yeah, doctor.
Dr. Gary Rosenberg
Yeah.
is a writer, and he writes about marriage. And he says there's 7 Ds on your way to divorce, and the first D is disappointment. And so what I tell couples is
Expectations.
just drop the expectations down. Just be like,
Yeah.
you're don't expect all this
Yeah.
crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Don't expect this person to fulfill your joy and all of that. So anyway,
I've had to learn that.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, of course.
There's seasons. Maria and I have been married 18 years, and I was just thinking as you're talking how glad that, first when we started, I was like, we should have a female talking with us about this. But if it was just me and Maria talking about sex, it would be too awkward to talk about like our journey.
How do you
and
like
everyone's like
me in
TMI.
bed? Yeah,
Nobody
it's
wants
like,
to talk
no,
about
that's-
your journey. The expectations thing, like making your spouse happy it can be an idol. It can be something where like that happiness actually comes from God, and if it's all coming from me or contingent upon how I deliver, her expectations are off. I'm going to be serving her instead of serving God. Like, it's going to be challenging. And so I'm imagining the person who writes this question about them not wanting to make love to their husband or their wife anymore is they're looking for permission. And you would say, hey, this is one of the Ds, right? This is
the disappointment. You need to.
When somebody's disappointed in this relationship, there's no way you're both.
Yeah, no, and it might just be I mean, we all have seasons. So there's seasons where physically you got to figure out other ways. You got little kids, and I get it. But Yeah, got to work on it and have open conversations about expectations, and then you can't have this sex conversation without also lightly challenging people, not only toward quantity but quality. And there's people who, I remember doing a massive survey at our church. It was like 3,000 or 4,000 people took it. We were going to do a marriage series, and I wanted some data of the people in the seats, and so they filled out this like 40 question survey, and 15 of the questions were about sex. And what I found was it was like a high percentage of our church was having sex twice a week. But then when I asked them about the quality of the sex, it wasn't great. And so what I was able to do was look at the church and go, look, a bunch of you, the quantity's there. You're having sex 2 or 3 times a week. That's a happy church.
Yeah.
The quality of it is pretty mediocre.
Yeah.
So it's an exchange. It's 3 minutes, 4 minutes of this and that. How do we get the quality up? How do you play games and be flirty and try this and try that and be experimental with things? All of that stuff. That's the part of the fun of the marriage covenant.
About this.
No
one talks about this. My pastor came in the other day to meet with all of the guys, and we had this huge group of guys, and he literally said, "Don't make your wife a masturbation machine." Yes. And I was like, man, these guys are probably not getting frequency, but then a lot of them are probably not getting quality, or they're not providing quality.
Yes, exactly.
Right, and that's such a paradigm shift
Totally.
of serving. So like if you approach the bedroom as you're serving her, that's better for everybody. I mean,
100%.
You're gonna make her happy. You're gonna be happy.
Yeah, 100%.
There
was a thing we used to do. You would come to this class that Aaron and I would put on if you were married 3 years and under, and we would gather you for 2. It was like 2 or 3 weeks every Wednesday night for 2 or 3 weeks. You could only join it if you were married 3 years and under, because there's certain conversations and things you're doing at that stage.
Yeah.
And so at the last one, Aaron would take the girls out and I would take the guys out, and we would have the real don't record this conversation, right? And my principle was your wife comes first.
Yeah.
And I told them I mean every double entendre of that sentence, right?
Yeah.
Your wife comes first in life, in bed, in whatever. And that as a general principle goes on to serve, to your point, it goes on to serve them. It gets reciprocated, so yeah. But all these challenges are real. I get it. Life sucks. You get beat up with your finances and kids, and emotionally you're tired and you're strained, and work. All of this feeds into our sexuality, and I think a healthy couple is a couple that just tries their best to. There's going to be seasons where, honey, I'm not that into it.
Yeah.
But it can be one way. This is potential. There's other seasons where it's like, hey, let's really work on this.
Maria and I've never told this before, but Maria and I wrote a book years ago called Winning at Marriage. And after the first copy was sold out, we changed it to Practicing Marriage. Because I explained what winning at marriages was practicing on these things, but then it just didn't sound right. It sounds like you could win at marriage. Yeah. So I changed it to Practicing Marriage.
That's great.
Now it's got a new cover. It's got like a playbook. It looks like it's a
cool.
play,
Like a football
and it's only
game.
5 chapters, but the last chapter is actually on sexual frequency, and I wrote one chapter, and Maria wrote one chapter.
Great.
And so, when we do a marriage conference or a seminar, it's like you got to have 2 views of this, because you're 2 different people, And so it sounds like you and Aaron were doing the same thing, but like to my point, my point was like practicing this. It's like this is not something anybody who's watching is nailing.
No,
I mean intimacy intimacy. Man, I don't know if you ever every decision you make either brings you closer together or further apart. So dynamic that you can't really say I've arrived.
No.
So yeah.
No, you can never win. It's always something you're chasing.
Last question.
Yes.
Okay? When my wife is out of town, is it okay for me to masturbate? I get this question a lot.
Okay. So you're asking as justice? What
no.
would you say to that question?
I got this question from somebody.
Right.
There was a group of people.
Here, it's on the card.
There was a group of people that gathered recently.
Yes.
And it wasn't a submitted question.
Okay.
But I thought it kind of would be a nice way to end this.
Yes.
Because the truth is that some people are self-satisfied.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering if maybe this question comes from that. I don't want to have sex with my husband. He can't bring me to climax anyways.
Right.
I'm self-satisfied.
Right.
And the husband's got his own routine that he does.
Yeah.
So I got this question live.
Sure.
It was actually a woman who asked it. She asked it in front of a lot of people and just was like, hey,
this is my situation.
Yeah.
Or she said, hypothetically, I have a friend.
No,
who's
she
self-satisfied.
basically said, talk about this.
Right.
And
So-
my heart went out to this person because that's, I think, a real thing.
Sure. Yeah. I think if the sin that's talked about, the sin that's talked about in the Bible, is people used to, they used to interpret the sin of Onan or whatever as spilling a seed on the ground.
Seed on the ground or whatever.
And that was masturbating. And so they said, I think
I don't think that's what that was though, right?
No,
He was just trying not to impregnate her.
Yeah. So, but that's how people interpret it. So I think the sin that's talked about, obviously, is sexual immorality. And lust. That's a junk drawer category for anything that's not sex with your husband and wife in the context of marriage, and then lust itself obviously is lust. So if there's a way, I don't know the answer to this question other than to say, is there a way to masturbate to satisfy some physiological need without crossing into the sin of lust that Jesus talks about in the Sermon on the Mount, when he says, if you lust after a woman, I'd rather you pluck out your eyes, as a way of life. Is there a way to do that? Is that even what this is? If someone's gone for a certain amount of time and you need to, meet some physiological need, could that possibly be okay if it didn't cross into lusting? Maybe. I don't have a Bible verse for it. I would think the trajectory would be the possibility to do so, but certainly not if it's adversely affecting the sex that you're going to have with your spouse because you're too self-satisfied. You're supposed to leave yourself so there's a desire for your spouse. Right. So how would you answer that question?
Well, I have a teenage son.
Yeah.
And so I'm having these conversations with him.
Yeah.
And I remember how my dad talked to me about it. So he's like, son, this is going to be up to you. We're talking about masturbation. Mm-hmm. And he said, I'll just tell you this. If you can overcome this, you can overcome anything.
Right.
He actually said this. If you can conquer this, you can conquer anything. Yeah. And what my dad did is he gave me a vision for being a man of self-control.
Yeah, self-mastery, as we talked about,
And I loved that vision.
Yeah, that's
great. And so it was almost like, it's not so much about it being a sin or not. Mm-hmm. At some point, it's like, the Bible says more than once that some things are permissible, but they're not beneficial. Yeah. Like some things are like gray areas and you're not going to know.
Sure.
And kind of hear that, that's what you're saying too. It's like, I don't have a Bible verse for masturbation if it's not compromising in the lust area, so I just think that
the vision discipline I gave, to have self-mastery sets you up to have strength in other areas. It shows your mental fortitude, it shows your discipline, it shows all of that. So
is masturbation addictive? 100%. It's a dopamine release.
Yeah, of course.
Is it a gateway to a whole sorts of wild fetishes? Mm-hmm. Does it lead you down a road where you're going to be married and now you're going to have trouble being satisfied because you've been looking at so much pornography and it's all these weird things that have your body has been. I was reading about this study one time about this kid. I guess it's a young man, and it was a computer monitor, and in the background there was like a catcher's mitt above his computer monitor. And you know how like when your body has climaxed to certain things, like the synapses form, and it's like, this is what turns me on, and your brain starts
creating. Pathway gets carved
and that's how fetishes happen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like some guys look at a Google space bar and instantly they're turned on because
they equate it with Pavlov's dog. Yeah,
sure. So
you know what Pavlov's dog is? They rang a bell and then fed the dog, and then every time they would feed the dog, Pavlov was a psychologist back in the day. They would feed the dog and ring a bell, and feed the dog and ring a bell, and then of course over time all he had to ring the bell and it would salivate.
Yeah.
So Pavlov's dog is that you correspond.
That's exactly what we're talking about.
Thing with a thing. Yes.
But the weird study that I was reading was about how this item that was sitting on top of the computer or was in the background.
Sure.
Was a catcher's mitt.
Baseball glove, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like that's...
Every time he sees it, he gets...
Isn't that weird?
Right.
And so so you think about a young man who doesn't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex and like all these things are happening, and then like...
Hand him a...
and I just walk with so many guys. I've taken over 100 guys through a journey to overcome pornography.
Love it.
Last time I looked at pornography, I was like 21, I think, before I got married. And like, I am so glad that God delivered me and helped me. I had to meet with the group every Wednesday for a year of good friends that were trustworthy to finally just break free of all that and have my brain rewashed, and I can't, and the stuff that I was looking at is not the stuff that is available to kids now. Back in the day when I was looking at pornography, it was magazines, you know what I mean? It was not the stuff that's on our phone. And so I would just say, do you want to is your vision for your life not being mastered by anything?
Right.
Do you want to be a master? Do you want to say, I have self-control? Right. And so part of you and I both travel a lot every month. Mm-hmm. part of it's like I'm in a hotel room and I never turn the TV on in a hotel room ever. Call me a prude, but I don't want that temptation. But could I FaceTime my wife? Could I get on the phone with her? Would that be okay?
Right.
Of course.
Yes.
That's you and your wife.
Right.
But there's also a value. And what if she wants to do that? But there's also like, hey, I also want to be a man of self-control.
Yeah.
And waiting.
Yeah.
And not settling.
Intensifies it, and the anticipation.
We're both
like
waiting
dating,
together. Yeah.
You're dating, and you touch her. And
so it's not.
But
it's
so listen to your point. Sorry, finish your point. Sorry.
I was just saying that self control.
Yes.
You know, is
beautiful.
it's a fruit of the spirit.
100%.
So
literally, and to your point about
people think we're such a prude. Like, you're so crazy.
How the porn stuff affects you. We had a couple come in. They met with Aaron and I, and we were doing marriage counseling with them, and she wanted to have sex with him. He wasn't really into all that much, and she said, "Well, why not?" And he just said, "I've been pleasuring myself by looking at porn and masturbating for so long. How could you ever compete with me?
So sad.
I'm so good at my own body that you're lost down there. You don't even know." And I'm just
That's
like,
heartbreaking, dude.
What? So even if that was true, you shouldn't say it. But the fact that it's true is heartbreaking. To your point, there's negative impacts that happen that you can't even think about when this
kind of equipment is this guy using?
What
kind of what do you mean good at your body? How how complicated is this?
Yeah. So this is why it's like that to me is the negative impact of this.
Play the advocate for a second for a young man who's having wet dreams every night, or who's having a heart Is there a version where masturbation without lust is possible, and how does the biochemistry work? Where a young man is a volcano, and he's gonna go off,
right?
And he's gonna have that.
Any way you cut it, it's gonna happen. Yeah.
So, is there any version of that?
Well, and I think there's a beautiful conversation to have, which is a very subversive conversation in the context of our Western culture about even the reality of dating. And I know you guys talk about this a lot. What does dating look like now? What it used to look like, because everyone was getting married at 16 and starting family. The female body, it's kind of crazy. It is ready. I had this girl in our church. They got married and pregnant very quick. I think she was like 19. She had a baby. That baby pushed out, and she was back working in 2 months, like
19.
or 2 weeks. She was just right out of boom. It's 19, bam. And then I have my other friend. She's like 41. She has a baby. Of course, her body. Oh my! It's like I don't like what our body. These ladies back in the Bible times, they're pushing out babies at 15, 16 years old. These families are starting through like group dates with people watching over them, and they're traveling together, and their family. They're all and hey, let's arrange our. It's not going on Tinder or whatever and just endlessly scrolling, which social scientists call the paralysis of choice. We have it used to be that you'd marry one of the 12 girls in your village that weren't your sister. Now, right now, you have the global village where you could just scroll endlessly and you have all the choices, and it creates a paralysis of choice, and you freeze. You don't even know what to do. And so my cousin, who got married before there was smartphones.
The cousin you matched with on Tinder? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, that's funny. So he got a divorce and got back into the dating scene, and he said, the world has changed. I don't even know what to do.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm paralyzed.
Yeah, but you know what hasn't changed? God's vision.
Yeah.
What's best for our life.
Exactly.
It's like, man.
Follow that, man. He knows what he's if God exists, this is what's right. I talk to people, man, if God exists, wouldn't you love to know what he thinks about some stuff? Yeah, look, he told us.
Yeah.
It's like, if God exists, hypothetically, probably his way of doing stuff is the best. And good thing is he wrote it down and he told us what to do. And every time we try to take it into our own hands, we mess it up. And you can look at Hollywood, look at famous people, rich people, all these people who transcendentalize money or reputation or being famous. They replace God with that, and their soul shrivels every time. Yeah. They're divorced 5 times. They're miserable. They're suicidal. They're drug addicts. They're alcoholics. Why? Because we're trying to run down this road and fulfill our lives with the thing. And this is this is just to end this conversation on this the sex topic. John Piper in his book on marriage has this. Actually, it's his book on the Sermon on the Mount, what Jesus demands of the world. He has one of the sections on where Jesus talks about marriage, and he talks about sex, and he makes this really good point where he says, sex and marriage is temporary. Because when we get to heaven, all of that gets replaced, which means it's a great pointer to the kind of consummation that heaven will be like forever. Don't you want to know and follow the God who is pointing to an experience for eternity of which sex is like the smallest little piece of grass growing through a little bit of concrete that goes, this is a little hint of how good this place is going to be. And it's like, let's follow that to the God who gave us Jesus and, wants this for our life. So,
If you wouldn't mind, just look at the camera and just say to the person who's struggling in their marriage, to the person who's just feeling alone and who just, they actually want this vision, but everything in their life is not helping right now.
I think you got to you got to fight for it. You got to be intentional about it. You got to know that just because it's not easy and it's not coming easy doesn't mean you shouldn't be pursuing it. There's a psychologist I was reading that talks about the purpose of life. Right back in Genesis 1 and 2, God says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to be fruitful and multiply. I want you to fill the earth, subdue the earth, have dominion over it. Be an artist, be a this, be a that, raise a family. And he said, what happens in life is that if it's too easy, we lose our purpose and our meaning. And so one of the purposes of life is to take a load that we can barely hold and carry it to its completion. And that actually, that difficulty gives life a lot of meaning, and it gives it depth, and it gives it, and I think for you, yes, this might be a hard moment, whether it's in your marriage or a dating life or the sexuality or whatever. But if you pursue, if you push through under, as you talked about, with the power, the reason we have the Holy Spirit, if you're a Christian, is one of the things that Acts 1 says is he gives you power to actually be transformed. He doesn't just sit latent and do nothing. He's the one that we need to depend on so that we can see traction and evolution in our own relationships, and our own sexuality, whatever it is. And so don't give up. Keep going, because here's what Jesus cares about. Jesus doesn't just care about your first day. He cares about your last day. And what you really want is anybody can get married. The question is, how is your marriage on the last day, not the first day? The question about your sexuality is, where is it at when you meet Jesus on the last day of your life? All the struggles and tensions through, that's all of us. You're not alone in that. Keep going, endure, lean into him, because Jesus looks and says, well done, good and faithful servant. Not perfect servant. Well done, good and faithful. You actually stayed till the end, your last day, and you were still going. So I would encourage you to do that.
Such a good episode. Thank you for coming all the way down.
Appreciate it.